Monster Hunter Stories 3: Twisted Reflection feels like a game born to prove that the series finally wants to be seen as a major player within the Monster Hunter brand, rather than just the franchise's lighter side. Capcom has placed an environmental crisis, two kingdoms on the brink of collapse, and twin Rathalos bearing the sky scale mark, linked to a civil war from 200 years ago, at the center of the narrative. This conveys a much more serious ambition and tone to me, and even those who tested early versions have already highlighted that the game continues to lean into a darker side with real stakes for this universe. What draws my attention most in this development context is that Capcom doesn't seem to have tried to make more of the same, but rather expanded the scope of the formula with character creation, advanced battle tactics, egg hunting, and even habitat restoration as part of the officially shown package. My impression is that the studio understood that for a third game to truly justify its existence, it needed to feel grander in its adventure and more robust in its systems. This aligns with comments that exploration is broader and more involved than in previous entries. From the demo, the lingering feeling is one of confidence, because it isn't an isolated or overly restricted demonstration. It releases the initial part of the game for free, and even transfers the save to the full version. When a publisher does this so close to launch, and the demo maintains 82% positive reviews on Steam, I read it as a sign of a development cycle that, at least in the game's opening, is sure of what it is delivering. Another thing I liked about this direction is that Capcom seems to be modernizing the structure without dismantling the story's identity. As classic monster customization systems return early, exploration has become freer, and pacing features like quick finish and eliminating weak monsters on the map make progression less rigid. At the same time, tweaking pieces like removing talismans and replacing them with dishes prepared by Eleanor sounds to me like a team decision that wanted to reorganize legacy systems to make the loop more elegant, even at the risk of displeasing those who prefer everything exactly as it was before. I also see a well-calculated commercial development context, as Capcom released the demo on multiple platforms, set up deluxe and premium deluxe versions, and has already indicated an additional story for Rudy for the fall of 2026. To me, this shows a publisher treating Stories 3 as an important calendar product with a retention and content expansion plan, rather than a secondary release thrown onto the market to test interest. Twisted Reflection seems like the kind of sequel made by a team that studied exactly where Stories 2 pleased and where it still felt too small, and now tries to deliver a denser, freer, and more dramatic version of that idea. If the full campaign can sustain the strength of the beginning, balance these systems earlier in the game, and transform this war between Azuria and Vermeil into something emotionally convincing, I think Capcom may have found the chapter that definitively defines the modern identity of Monster Hunter.
Let's go.
The story seems much more ambitious and heavier than I expected for the sub-series, because Capcom has set up a scenario of two broken kingdoms, an environmental catastrophe, and a wartime atmosphere about to explode. Playing the opening of the demo, I had that feeling that the game wants to be remembered more for its drama and mystery than just the charisma of the monsters, and that hooked me quickly. The point that caught my attention most is how the story uses Azuria and Vermeil not just as a backdrop, but as part of the central conflict, since both countries are on the verge of destruction and the natural world is at the edge of collapse with endangered species. This gives a very different weight to the journey, because it doesn't feel like that typical adventure where you head out into the world just to grow as a hero. Here, there is a real sense of urgency. The twin Rathaloses, for me, are the best and riskiest idea of the plot at the same time, because they are born linked to the sky scale mark and the memory of the disastrous civil war from 200 years ago. I like this because it creates strong symbolism, but I also think the story will need to work this idea very well, so it doesn't seem like just another attempt to use Rathalos as an emotional shortcut within stories. Another thing I really enjoyed is the fact that the protagonist doesn't start as someone small discovering the world, but as the heir of Azuria and the kingdom's only Rathalos rider. In practice, this gives the narrative a more political and tragic energy, because the impression is that you enter the game already carrying too much responsibility on your shoulders from the start. Eleanor's presence also seems like an important success to me, because the official material places the rapprochement between the two sides and the distrust within Vermeil as part of the story's engine. Personally, this type of partnership between characters from opposing sides usually works very well when the script wants to talk about trauma, legacy, and hidden truths. So this is the part of the plot I am most invested in. From the demo and trailers, I felt that Twisted Reflection has everything it needs to have the best story in the series, if it can sustain the strong start, balance political drama with the human side of the characters, and provide a convincing payoff for the twin Rathaloses. Today, after seeing what Capcom has shown and feeling the atmosphere of the demo, I would say this is a story with more personality, more melancholy, and more ambition than I expected, and that has left me genuinely curious to see how far it goes. The gameplay provides a very good sense of evolution without abandoning what made the series work, because the foundation of reading attack types is still there, but now everything feels faster, visually clearer, and equipped with more tools for the player to dictate the pace of the fight. Playing the demo, I felt that combat finally has more presence and impact, as if Capcom understood that stories needed to feel a bit sharper in the player's hands. What I liked most about the combat is that it feels more active, even being turn-based, since the game continues to reward correctly reading the enemy, fills the kinship gauge more consistently, and transforms that into much more satisfying pressure windows. When you lock in the right decisions and enter that advantage sequence, the feeling is much better than simply pressing an efficient command, because there is that satisfying impression that you truly dismantled the monster through reading. The addition of things like attacking parts, causing stagger, toppling the enemy, and then unleashing the synchro rush was the change that sold the game to me most. To me, this gives the combat a tactical layer that stories always flirted with, but here it finally feels integrated in a way that gives each turn more intention, as choosing where to hit and when to prepare the burst has become much more important. In exploration, I found the evolution even clearer, because initial impressions in Capcom's material point to a world that is broader and freer, with access to movement skills like flying, climbing, water traversal, stealth, breath, and melee actions depending on the monster. This significantly changes the feeling of adventure, as progression feels less blocked by small artificial limitations and more focused on letting you experiment with the map creatively. I also liked the fact that egg collecting and exploration feel more organic within the loop, because the official walkthrough still links this to the habitat restoration system, giving the impression that exploring doesn't just serve to find resources or rare monsters, but also to feed a broader cycle of progress. This type of structure pleases me greatly, because it helps the gameplay from getting stuck in just battle after battle, and the demo already conveys that energy of a more complete journey. If I have one reservation, it's that this greater freedom might end up messing with the discovery curve for those who liked the more controlled progression of previous titles, especially since some impressions suggest there isn't that traditional separation of high rank and exploration, and that difficult content appears very early, with rare and super rare dens appearing in abundance. I personally like this boldness, but I also think it might slightly reduce the sense of staggered achievement if the balancing of the entire game doesn't accompany this decision. Overall, my opinion is very positive. After the demo and what the developer has shown, Twisted Reflection seems to me to have the strongest gameplay in the series, precisely because it joins accessibility, tactical reading, flashier combat, and looser exploration without losing the identity of Monster Hunter stories. Today, I see this game as a sequel that doesn't just want to repeat the comfort of stories, but rather deliver a more modern, more expressive, and much more enjoyable system to play minute by minute. The transition to the RE engine has done an incredible amount of good for the franchise, delivering a very well-calibrated mix between that anime style we already love and the textures of a big-budget game. To me, it no longer looks like a simple, lower-budget spin-off, but a premium release that is a feast for the eyes from the very first scene. What I liked wasn't just the pure technology, but how the art direction carries the experience the entire time. The aesthetic is much more mature and detailed, making character expressions and monster designs feel organic within the environments. I feel the team finally found the perfect balance point, where the game manages to be super colorful and vibrant, but without losing that more serious and dramatic tone that the story demands this time. And speaking of environments, the presentation of locations by the development team left me jaw-dropped, especially regarding the real-world inspiration. Seeing Azuria Castle with that architectural feel inspired by Spain and massive fabrics that resemble Rathalos wings gives a sense of scale that previous games simply didn't have. Later, when they showed the Shepparton region and that atmosphere clearly drawn from the Asian style we saw in Monster Hunter Rise, it became clear to me that the world will have fantastic visual variety for us to explore. But the graphic detail that bought me the most was the environmental storytelling placed in areas like Galiad, which the team itself explained in behind-the-scenes videos and recent events. It is a port city with beautiful Mediterranean-style decorations, except the surrounding ocean has dried up and turned into a barren desert. I think it's genius when graphics tell the story of environmental collapse before a character opens their mouth to explain. And seeing that contrast between rich architecture and the sand taking over gave me a very immersive, desolate vibe. When we enter combat, the visual evolution becomes even more apparent, especially in the special attacks and the new user interface. Move animations and synchronized attacks have gained immense weight on the screen, with particle effects and camera angles that make every impact very satisfying to watch. Additionally, Capcom redesigned the entire interface to place all weakness and advantage information in a much cleaner and more dynamic way, proving that a beautiful and well-animated interface greatly improves immersion during fights. Now, speaking about the technical side that I know many of you want to know about, the performance on next-gen platforms shows that the game is ambitious, but fortunately, full of options. Playing on the most powerful consoles, we have access to quality, balanced, and performance modes, and I found the option to unlock the frame rate very cool. Quality mode in 4K is by far the most beautiful way to play due to the very high rendering distance, although I recommend having a screen with variable refresh rate to handle frame drops, as the fluidity in balanced mode ends up being the sweet spot for those wanting stability. My opinion is that Monster Hunter Stories 3 Twisted Reflection hit the bullseye by embracing the anime aesthetic using the company's most powerful graphics engine. It is a massive leap compared to the second game, delivering grand landscapes, extremely well-modeled monsters, and an art direction that helps sell the epic tone of this new journey. If the final version can maintain this polished visual quality from start to finish without stuttering much during moments of chaos on screen, I guarantee you we will have one of the most beautiful and visually interesting RPGs to play and watch this year. My most honest impression regarding performance is that the game arrives in the classic state of modern Capcom. Visually ambitious, well optimized on average, but with some rough edges we need to understand before buying. The demo was already a very faithful gauge of what to expect, and that in itself is an honest move by the developer, because what you test there accurately reflects the real state of the game. On next-gen consoles, the game offers 3 modes: quality, balanced, and performance, and all run with an unlocked frame rate. This might seem great on paper, but in practice it means that without VRR, the experience can be unstable depending on the mode you choose, because quality mode on PS5, for example, fluctuates quite a bit between 30 and 45 FPS depending on the area. For those playing on a TV without VRR support, as I had to test, balanced mode ended up being the ideal point, delivering a smoother experience with only occasional drops. On the PS5 Pro, the story improves significantly, and the community that compared the two consoles reached the same conclusion. Every mode is comfortable to play on the Pro, with balanced mode being the most balanced choice, running above 60 FPS most of the time. Those who have this console definitely won't have much to complain about regarding performance, because the technical advantage clearly appears when you compare the two side by side. On Xbox Series X, the situation is similar to the PS5, but those with a VRR monitor have a clear advantage because performance mode runs between 70 and 90 FPS with the support of the technology. Quality mode without VRR on Xbox was what pleased me least in the reviews I followed, because that range of 30 to 45 FPS without any intentional lock looks ugly on screen, and Capcom should urgently offer a fixed 30 FPS cap in this mode for those who don't have VRR. On PC, the demo left me hesitant for a very specific reason. There are reports of AMD users being impacted by crashes and more serious incompatibilities, plus temperature alerts on more demanding GPUs. The good news is that for those with a more robust setup, the demo ran well, and the PC will certainly be the platform that benefits most from future patches and manual settings that allow adjusting FSR and shadows to find the ideal balance. As for the Nintendo Switch 2, the situation is the most challenging of all, and I prefer to be honest here, because many of you might be considering buying on this platform. The game runs, it has a stunning look for the hardware, but the frame rate fluctuates a lot, especially in open areas, with drops between 35 and 45 FPS appearing frequently, and the handheld version features a softer resolution and aggressive motion blur, which combined make the image a bit imprecise in motion. The real hope here is that a launch or post-launch patch fixes this, because the potential is there, but the execution still needs polish. Overall, my opinion is that Monster Hunter Stories 3 arrives technically better than many RPG releases we've seen recently, but still with real problems that depend heavily on your platform and setup. If you have a PS5, Xbox Series X with VRR, or a strong PC, the experience will be very good right at launch. If you depend on the Switch 2 or an AMD GPU on PC, I would recommend waiting for the first patch before diving headfirst, because it is far too good a game to be marred by technical issues that Capcom clearly has the capacity to fix. Is it worth buying Monster Hunter Stories 3, Twisted Reflection, right now at launch? Or is it better to hold off? To be direct, after playing the demo from start to finish and analyzing everything Capcom has released so far, my answer is yes, it's very worth it, but with some important caveats depending on where you are going to play. It is a game that has clearly raised the bar for the franchise and stopped being just a spin-off to become a heavyweight RPG on the calendar. The biggest reason to pick it up at launch is the state of the game for those who have the right machines. If you are going to play on PS5, on Xbox Series X with a TV that has VRR, or on a robust PC, the experience will be excellent right away. Capcom has delivered much more tactical and rewarding combat, and exploration with monsters has never felt so free and connected to the world, not to mention the story of the twin Rathalos, which already hooked me just from the opening. In these cases, picking it up on March 13th makes total sense because you will enjoy the hype and discover secrets along with the community. On the other hand, there is an audience that I strongly recommend wait a bit, whether for a sale or for corrective patches. If you play on Switch 2 or have a PC with an AMD graphics card that struggled in the demo, the unstable performance and technical issues I mentioned before are real reasons for caution. Additionally, Capcom has a habit of releasing performance updates and free extra content months later, so those who wait will not only pay less, but will most likely play a more polished and complete version. But after all, who is this game for? Firstly, it's a full meal for series veterans and for those who love turn-based RPGs that reward reading the enemy instead of just mashing an attack button. If you like the idea of collecting monsters, building genetic setups, and getting lost in customization while following a heavier political fantasy narrative with kingdoms in collapse and an environmental crisis, Twisted Reflection was designed exactly for your profile. And for those who are new to the franchise or even the world of Monster Hunter, the game is an excellent entry point. The demo made it clear that the initial learning curve is very friendly, and the fact that the new interface places combat information so visually helps a lot for those who don't want to memorize complex weakness tables. Even if the story makes references to the past, the conflict of Azuria and Vermeil stands on its own, so you don't need to have played the first two to understand the drama happening here. I will definitely buy it at launch. What I saw in the demo sold me on the idea that this is the definitive version of the story's formula, and the more melancholic and urgent tone of this civil war, combined with the beautiful RE engine visuals, are things I want to explore as soon as possible on my PS5. I really love this cycle of hunting for eggs and testing new strategies, so the game already has my money guaranteed for the base version. In the end, Monster Hunter Stories 3 Twisted Reflection seems to be that rare case of a sequel that perfectly understands what it needs to improve. If your hardware is up to the task and your wallet allows for the launch price, go for it without fear, because the demo proved that the content has plenty of quality to justify the investment. If you are on more limited platforms, add it to your wish list and wait for the first major patch, because the game isn't going anywhere and the experience will be much more pleasant after Capcom tidies up the house.